Power yoga is one of the most popular styles of yoga worldwide. Its roots go back to the 1980s with three main teachers: Bryan Kest, Baptiste, and Beryl Birch. This style of yoga is one of the most powerful forms of movement and exercise because it encompasses strength, flexibility, balance, stamina, and cardio. In this podcast, we will explore the story and the evolution of why power yoga is one of the most powerful practices on the planet. Hey guys, thank you for watching this video. Make sure that you press subscribe and to click on the link to get 3 amazing classes: power yoga, yin yoga, and meditation, to increase that strength, flexibility, and calm. All right, let's jump into the video. Hey guys, and welcome to episode number 6D of the Be Ultimate podcast. This is Travis Elliott, and it's an honor to have you back here on the podcast, where every week we explore all things ultimate. Sometimes yoga, sometimes meditation, sometimes personal development, wisdom, basically whatever I feel inspired to talk about and then to share with you guys. So this week, we're going to be discussing power yoga. This is something that's changed my life and something that's a huge part of my life. And I realized that I've never done a podcast solely on power yoga. I've never done a video on this. So I want to talk about power yoga. You know, power yoga is one of the most popular styles of yoga right now throughout the whole entire world. And, you know, sometimes it might be called vinyasa or hot yoga. But any type of yoga that really flows and has an athletic component to it typically falls underneath the umbrella of power yoga. And it's really spread these last maybe three or so decades because of really a lot of reasons. You know, on a physical level, you know, you get strength, balance, flexibility, stamina, and cardio. So it's kind of like one-stop shopping. You know, you go to a good power yoga class and you don't need anything else. It really covers it all. You also get a good sweat, so there's an element of detoxification. It doesn't require a lot of equipment. You don't need to go get weights. You don't need to go to a gym. You know, you really just need your yoga mat, your body, your breath, and you're taking care of a lot of different things all at once. Now, the founders of power yoga, there's really 3 who are credited with being the pioneers, and they all were creating this and coming up with this around the same time. These 3 founders were Bryan Kest, Baptiste, and Beryl Birch. Now, just so you know, Bryan Kest is somebody that I've had a lot of contact with and I have a relationship with and have known Bryan for many years. He started off as a teacher, and over the years he became a mentor, and then he became a friend. We used to get together, our families, and hang out. So I know Bryan really, really well. Baron, I don't know, and Beryl Birch, I also don't know. So I'm a little biased towards Bryan, but at the same time, I want to make sure that we give credit where credit is due, and that also includes Baron Baptiste, who we'll talk about, and Beryl Birch. Now, for a lot of people, there is a stigma that is placed on that term power yoga. And usually the stigma is espoused by people that have never experienced it. And so that sometimes that stigma is that power yoga is just people that are ego driven and vanity driven, people that just want to go get a workout. They don't care about the spirituality of yoga. They don't care about the roots of yoga. And although that could be true for a certain portion of the population that goes to power yoga, from my experience is that a lot of people that have practiced power yoga and that have been my students over the years we go to power yoga not just for the physical benefits, but also for the mental and the emotional benefits. And although the spirituality might not be shoved into people's face in power yoga, that is really one of the things that's opened up the door to make yoga as mainstream as it's now become. And it's become mainstream. These teachers, Baptiste, Bryan Kest, Beryl, Burch, they really turned on zillions of people to yoga. They changed the landscape. And because of that, deeply honored and grateful that these teachers have really paved the path for people like myself to get to also go out and spread power yoga. So I started going to yoga back in 2003. And if you've heard my other podcasts, you've heard the story. But basically, after a year of being badgered by an employee at a hotel, he convinced me to go to this yoga class. And I went with this teacher named Govindas at a place called Santa Monica Power Yoga, which was run by Bryan Kest. And it was phenomenal. It was love at first sight. The class blew me away because of everything that I just mentioned before. It was strong, it stretched me out, challenged my balance, sweated a lot. It was also very soulful. The teacher Govindas that I did my class with, he sang this mantra prayer at the end of the class with this instrument called a harmonium. And I just had this real transcendental experience after having like the best exercise that I'd ever experienced before. So Govindas changed my life. You probably heard me mention him many times on these other podcasts. And I studied with Govindas for a couple of years. I had a couple of near-death experiences. I almost drowned in Kauai. I survived a tsunami in Thailand of 2004. And eventually, Govindas invited me to go to India with him. He had been to India many times. It was my first visit, and we went and kind of co-led a yoga retreat in Goa outside of Mumbai. And after we did the retreat in Goa, myself, Govindas, and his wife Radha, we flew up to northern India. We went to Delhi, and then we went to the sacred town of Vrindavan. And Vrindavan was really one of the most powerful experiences of my life because there weren't Westerners there. So it was a real immersion into the depths and the authenticity of where Bhakti Yoga, the yoga devotion, comes from. That deserves a whole other podcast episode, so don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. But what I do want to say about this trip to Vrindavan is that one of the things that I was really struck by was I was surrounded by a lot of these spiritual sadhus and pilgrims, and many of them were very, very sick. And I had this eye-opening experience that this is why the physical practice of yoga is so important, that we have to take care of our bodies so that our body is strong and healthy, so that then we have the capacity to allow our soul, to allow our heart to share its gifts, to fulfill its mission, to be aligned with its purpose. If you're not feeling well and if you're ravaged with disease and sickness, then you're not going to be able to fulfill your mission. So when I came back from India, I actually had a greater respect and appreciation for the physical practice. And it was around that time when I decided to start studying with one of the creators of Power Yoga, Bryan Kest. And Bryan was he was different than my first teacher, Govindas. You know, Govindas played music. Govindas, I guess you could say, was more spiritual. He was definitely had more of a bhakti component to him. Whereas Bryan was, he was fierce and very, very masculine. And I learned so much about him. You know, he swears a lot in his class, which for some people they love because it makes it more real. It makes it more accessible. Other people are turned off by the swearing, but Bryan doesn't care. He doesn't care what you think of him. He is who he is. He is the embodiment of somebody who exists in their authentic power. He's the most passionate teacher that I've ever experienced. You know, the way that he uses his voice and every word that comes out of his mouth is just fiercely passionate. And he's also one of the funniest teachers that I've ever experienced. Probably the most funny teacher. And I'll never forget one time I went and did a weekend workshop with Bryan in Asheville, North Carolina, and he starts off the weekend on Friday evening with giving a talk. And he spoke for probably about 90 minutes, and at points in his talk, we had the whole room dying with laughter. And then 10 minutes later, he had the whole entire room just sobbing, crying. He really has a gift of speaking and doing it in a way that pierces through all the BS and through all the armor and all the unnecessary stuff, and really speaking these universal truths that you know to be true from the depths of your heart. But he does it in a way that's so ninja-like. It's so it's so skillful. He's never jamming the spirituality. He's never jamming the stuff down your throat. But at the same time, on some level, he's the most spiritual guy that I think I've ever met. I also learned a lot from Bryan about sequencing. He really was the first teacher where I was like, man, the way he sequences his poses are so elaborate. And he would spend, sometimes 30 minutes just going through one side on a sequence. And then obviously you have to go back and you have to do the second side. But by the time you came back to the second side, it had been so long to go through the first side that you forgot what was coming up. You forgot what you were going to do next. And I thought that was brilliant because it kept you on your toes as a student. It wasn't like you were just going right side, left side, left side, and it becomes monotonous and predictable. It was like this beautiful, long, elegant series of poses that then would be repeated on the other side. And it really brought me, at least, into a state of profound presence and awareness, which, of course, is the essence of all of yoga. Bryan also owned the seat of the teacher. Like, he took command of his classes, and his classes would average over 100 people back in the day, just packed full of people. And the beauty of what Bryan did is he was teaching donation yoga because he had used to go on these meditation retreats, Vipassana with Goenka, that were also offered on donation, and he brought the donation philosophy to the yoga world. So you'd be in these classes with 100, 140 people sometimes, and you'd have people that were multimillionaires, people that were soccer moms, people that were homeless. Like, it was open to all walks of life. You had different ethnicities, different ages. It was probably the most diverse yoga studio and yoga classes that there ever was. So he would own the seat of the teacher. He would teach these really large classes, no microphone, no music, just with his voice, the power of his voice, with command, with ferocity, and with passion. So being that he was one of the pioneers of power yoga, this guy really embodied to me that energy of power and strength. Bryan also didn't have any monkey suit. And what I mean by the monkey suit is like, he didn't wear, 10 mala beads around his necklace. He didn't have dreadlocks. He wasn't wearing orange robes. He didn't have like a big gray beard. He was just a normal looking dude in his white V-neck and his khaki shorts. And that to me was also really, really liberating because it said you didn't have to play a role to be a yoga instructor. That you just be yourself. And who you are is more than enough. You don't have to put on a show. You don't have to pretend like you're somebody other than you're not. So I remember one time I was in his office and we were chatting and catching up about something at the Power Yoga studio. And I was telling him about how I was trying to save up money to buy me and my family a home, but I was short of cash. And without hesitation, Bryan just looked at me and he said, "I'll give you some money. Let me help you out. Let me give you $20,000." And I was so struck by that gesture of generosity, because it just spoke to how beautiful of a person that Bryan was and is. Just such a big open heart and so incredibly generous. As time went on, he asked me to start subbing his classes, and he had me teaching his prime time classes. He traveled a lot, so I had a lot of opportunity to teach, and I got experience teaching these really big classes as well, with 100 people in them. And again, it was donation based, so we would have a box at the back of the studio by the door, and people would drop their donation in the box, and that was their payment. And not everybody donated, but it worked out to where we had the best game in town as power yoga teachers. We really did. And I remember some of those classes just going home with a backpack full of cash. And it was just amazing. I felt like I'd won the lottery. I was teaching yoga, I was doing what I loved, and I was also making a living now doing that. So I went on to become one of his senior teachers at his studio, Power Yoga. And I just want to say, without any shame at all, that I've been heavily influenced by Bryan. Whether, especially earlier on in my teaching, his vocal delivery, his sequences, the phrases, the languaging, the vernacular, and even his jokes. And I have stolen all that stuff, and I've used it in my classes. And as I now tell my students when they do trainings and workshops with me, I'm like, take whatever you want. Take the jokes, take the phrases, take the stories, take the quotes, take whatever you want, because that's what I did for my teachers. So just to say that, he's been a big influence on me. Let's talk a little bit about Bryan's backstory, because it's pretty interesting. Bryan grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and he was a rebellious kid and a rebellious teenager, and because of bad behavior, he ended up getting kicked out of, I believe it was 9th grade at the age of 14, and he got kicked out of school. And by that point, his mom, who he was living with at the time, was so frustrated and so over Bryan's behavior, she didn't know what to do. She kicked him out of the house, especially because he got kicked out of school. So Bryan called his dad, who at that time was living in Hawaii, I believe on the island of Maui. And Bryan begged his dad to come stay with him. And his dad said, okay, but only under one condition. Bryan said, what's that? His dad said, only if you start doing yoga can you come stay with me. Bryan didn't have a lot of options, so clearly he had to say yes. So he had this agreement with his dad that he would get to stay with him, but he would start doing yoga. And he stuck to his agreement, and he started studying yoga. And one of his main teachers was a guy by the name of David Williams. David Williams is from my home state of North Carolina, so shout out to all the Be Ultimate podcasters from North Carolina. David Williams was one of the main teachers of Ashtanga Yoga. Now, just for clarification, there's two different Ashtanga Yogas. There's the original Ashtanga Yoga. Ash in Sanskrit means 8, Anga means limb, so it means the 8-limb path. So the original Ashtanga Yoga was created by the sage Patanjali. That's not what I'm talking about here with David Williams. David Williams taught a form of Ashtanga Yoga that was created by the Indian teacher Pattabhi Jois. And Ashtanga Yoga was an offshoot of something called Vinyasa Krama, taught by Pattabhi Jois's teacher Krishnamacharya. So Ashtanga Yoga was a set series of movements and sequences, breath linked to movement, that is pretty physical, pretty athletic. And there's a primary series, so you do that, you master the primary series, and that could take months or even years. And once you master that, then you move on to the secondary series. So there's kind of a set sequence that you move through as an Ashtanga yogi. And one of the great things about the Ashtanga yogis is just how disciplined that they are. They get onto their mat 6 days a week, and they're always doing their yoga. A lot of times when you see people that are doing the fancy yoga poses, the arm balances and the inversions and whatnot, they have had a strong Ashtanga yoga practice. So David Williams, who studied with Pattabhi Jois, is now teaching Ashtanga Yoga to Bryan Kest. So now Bryan has been introduced to Ashtanga Yoga, and he's now doing it. And then after some time, he decided that he wanted to go study with David's teacher, Pattabhi Jois, to go to Mysore, India, and learn it straight from his teacher's mouth. And Bryan went to Mysore, India for a few weeks, and he studied with Pattabhi Jois back before yoga was cool, back before yoga was mainstream, back before barely anybody knew about Ashtanga Yoga and knew about Pattabhi Jois, who later on became so famous that every day he would have hundreds and hundreds of people in his classes. So he ended up becoming very well known. So Bryan goes and he learns Ashtanga Yoga from Pattabhi Jois, and then eventually he comes back and he enrolls in his very first ever 10-day Vipassana meditation course with the teacher Goenka. Now, he goes through the Vipassana retreat, and if you've ever done a 10-day Vipassana, it's life-changing. If you haven't done it, you got to go do it at some point. Because it's like Navy SEAL training, but for your mind. And I think that there's not many more important things on this planet than the practices of learning to master your mind. So Bryan had done all this physical yoga, very strong, and then he goes and he does the mental yoga, basically. He does the real deep dive into meditation. And he gained and got so much from this experience. And at the end of the 10-day retreat, the way they do it on Goenka Vipassana is that it's all offered for donation. So you give what's called dana. You give whatever it is that you can give in exchange for that. And it was that experience that inspired Bryan to go create a studio that was also run off of donations. And this became the beginnings of Santa Monica Power Yoga, which was famously on the second floor above Radio Shack on Santa Monica Boulevard above the Radio Shack. And back then, when Bryan opened up the studio, there were no other studios in Santa Monica other than like a Yoga Works location. Now you go to Santa Monica and there's more yoga studios than Starbucks. So this was back before all that happened. Now, around this time, Bryan one day had woken up and his body was feeling different. And he started to do his Ashtanga Yoga practice, and he's going through the set series of movements and the set sequence, and his body is saying, we feel like we want to do something else, but his belief system and his training has said, no, you got to stick to the sequence. You got to do exactly what it is that you've learned. And so he had this little battle and this little war. Do I stick with the sequence, or do I listen to the wisdom of my own body and allow myself the openness and the space for spontaneity to be led by my wisdom instead of by some rigid belief system and structure? Fortunately, he decided to be dominated by his wisdom. And he spun off the main sequence of Ashtanga Yoga and he started to move his body in more of an improvisational way. And this was profound because this was really the birth of power yoga. It was as if in that moment we had gone from classical music all of a sudden to jazz. And power yoga opened up the possibilities now for sequencing because you weren't confined to that set sequence. Now, when he did this and he started to go out and teach power yoga, there was a big backlash from the Ashtanga community. People that would even write nasty articles in Yoga Journal about Bryan Kest and about how he was bastardizing yoga as they knew it back then. So tremendous backlash, but despite all that, he stuck to his guns, and he, being the rebel that he always was, he went on and blazed his own path. He blazed his own path of really teaching this new style of power yoga and presenting it in a way that was accessible to people. You know, people didn't have to go to his class and worry about it being religious or being new agey or being whatever. Like, it was just the real deal. And so again, that exposed hundreds and thousands, maybe even millions of people to yoga. Now, one of the things that took Bryan to a global level was when he made a video with Warner Brothers called Power Yoga. And if I remember correctly, it was a VHS tape that had 3 hour-long practices on it. And you can go look, I think they're up on YouTube somewhere, but in some of the classes, he's got cut-off jeans, he's got his shirt off, he has long, curly, brown hair, looks like Bon Jovi. I mean, it's such a trip, especially when you compare the 1980s, early 90s version of Bryan to current day version. But these VHS tapes became a global phenomenon and introduced even more people to power yoga based off what Bryan was doing in Santa Monica, California. And he really went on to become a legend. And he is a legend. And I don't know if there's any other yoga instructors on the planet that have taught more classes than Bryan has. He travels a lot. He teaches. He used to teach zillions of classes every week. And again, he mentored me a lot. And he said, Travis, you know, those first several years of teaching yoga, you cannot take a vacation. You cannot take a day off. You got to build your momentum so strong. It's like a train. And eventually, after several years of building up that momentum, then you'll start to travel. But when you come back from your traveling, you'll come back and the momentum will still be going because it's been built up so strong. But if you don't build that momentum up and you start taking days off and you start going on vacations prematurely, then you're just going to lose your momentum. And I listened to everything that he said. Again, Bryan was like, he to me was an example. He was a role model of somebody who had hit it big time with teaching yoga. So I listened to every word that he said. It was like my learning was getting to mentor with him. Bryan, you know, now talks about how he's a little disappointed with the name Power Yoga because, again, we talked a little bit about the stigma around it, but he feels like so much more than just the physical practice. In fact, he wants to change the name from Power Yoga to Grandma Yoga because he thinks that anybody should be able to do their yoga, that grandma should be able to do the yoga and grandpa should do the yoga, that yoga should be presented in a way that's accessible. One of these days, I want to get Bryan on this podcast and I want to do a long interview and then you can hear these stories straight from him. But from my best recollection, that's his story. Now, one of the other pioneers of power yoga is Baron Baptiste. Again, I don't know Baron. I've done his DVDs and stuff back in the day, and you know, I'm definitely inspired by his work and what he's done as well. But Baron, he came from a family of yogis, so he grew up in an environment where yoga was just part of the daily routine. So it was in his DNA, it was in his blood. If I'm accurate in this, he studied with Bikram, who is very controversial. Bikram is the teacher that has come up with a series of poses. I think there's 13, and it's repeated twice, and it's done in an environment that is 110 degrees Fahrenheit. There's a lot of controversy around him because of sexual assault and all sorts of drama. There's a Netflix documentary about Bikram if you want to go and learn more about him. But I believe that Barron had studied with Bikram and then eventually left, probably for good reason, and started his own thing. And his own thing was power yoga. And Barron, back in the early 90s, around the same time as Bryan, was also teaching power yoga. And he really was the one that inspired the whole hot yoga movement. He heated the environment up, not as hot as Bikram, but hotter than what was typically done at that time, and did a flow style class within that was inspired by Bikram and inspired by Ashtanga Yoga. And Barron really brought, in his own unique way, power yoga to a mainstream audience as well through his DVDs. And he, at one point, was working with the NFL team, the Philadelphia Eagles. He was on their coaching staff, teaching them yoga. So he was one of the first teachers to bring yoga to professional athletics. And to this day, he travels around the world and has his own Baptiste power yoga movement going on as well. Would also love to have him on the podcast at some point. And then the other third pioneer of power yoga was a woman by the name of Beryl Burch, who her story really began back in the 1970s. And she had been studying yoga for quite a while, and then eventually she got on the Ashtanga Yoga train as well. So you can see that Ashtanga Yoga was the mother of power yoga. And Ashtanga's mother was Vinyasa Krama by Krishnamacharya. So you have Vinyasa Krama that inspired Ashtanga Yoga that then inspired power yoga. So that's how things have evolved. So Beryl Burch, she gets on the Ashtanga Yoga train. She's studying with some of the senior teachers of Ashtanga Yoga, and then eventually she goes and studies with Pattabhi Jois as well, and eventually goes on to help coordinate his trips to America, where he came and he began to spread his teachings through the United States. She went on to write some famous books. She wrote a book called Power Yoga, and also contributed equally in her own way, just like Bryan and Barron, to the whole movement of power yoga. So hopefully that gives you like a little bit of the backstory and the history about power yoga. For me, power yoga is an athletic moving meditation. It's athletic, and I love the athleticism because I think that, again, we need strength. We need bodies that are powerful. We need bodies that can withstand the curveballs that the universe throws at us. That we need a body that can withstand the storms that we have to go through. If we're weak and we're low energy, then we're going to be taken down. And it's almost like the Shaolin fighting monks that were inspired by the Shaolin tree that could withstand these storms because they had both strength and flexibility. Power yoga really gives you that. It makes your body strong, but it also makes your body supple. And it brings you into balance. There's many forms of fitness. You could go to the gym and you could lift weights and you could get huge chest muscles and back muscles and quadriceps. But if you're just doing strength stuff, then the stronger you get, the tighter you get, and the more you limit your range of motion. And then eventually your range of motion is so limited you can't even use your strength. You can't even move your body because you've now become imbalanced. And the imbalance is usually because somebody in their mind wants to have big muscles because their ego thinks that in order to be cool, they have to have big muscles. That's being dominated by your ego and your vanity, whereas power yoga is about being dominated by your wisdom. And wisdom says it's not about imbalance, it's not about ego, It's about taking care of your whole entire terrain of your body in a way that is thorough, compassionate, gentle, sensitive, sensuous, but at the same time taking you to your edge. You see, the reason why it's called power yoga is because it's meant to empower you so that you're not dependent on an external teacher. You're not dependent on anything outside of you. Because if you're dependent on anything outside of you, whether that's a person, an object, money, the projection of an image or status, then you're giving your power away. That would be powerless yoga. So power yoga is about saying, I'm not going to be swayed by external validation and external circumstances to bring me to wholeness. That true wholeness, true meaning, true fulfillment, true happiness, true joy, it all comes from within. And this is why I teach power yoga. I teach it to empower you. I teach it to empower my students so that they too can find this from within. Because the more of us that are empowered and switched on that way, the more of us that are lit up like this, then the more that we're going throughout our day, throughout our life, and we're also creating a ripple effect where we're also inspiring other people to do the same. And then eventually we reach critical mass within the collective consciousness where enough of us are empowered, enough of us are awake, enough of us are in a state of wholeness where all of a sudden the problems of the world just start to diminish and maybe even go away. So this is the mission that I'm on. Now, technically, my style of yoga that I teach, I don't call power yoga, I call it holistic yoga flow, and that's where I've evolved power yoga to the next level that resonates with me. And that involves what I call the 6 dimensions. The 6 dimensions are number 1, body, number 2, energy, number 3, mind, number 4, heart, number 5, awareness, and number 6, soul. And so I'll use yoga practices, breathwork practices, information, neuroscience, knowledge to feed the mind, gratitude, loving kindness, compassionate meditation practices for the heart, other forms of meditation for the awareness, and then the soul that is just inside of us all, the soul that is beyond time, place, and space, the soul that's the dimension of us that is beyond the physical. The soul is the part of us that is unlimited, it's eternal, it's divine, it's pure. So taking the best of power yoga and also moving it in this direction where those 6 dimensions get addressed. So I may teach a class and I call it power yoga, but really what I'm teaching are those 6 dimensions, and that's why you have a powerful experience in that class, because it's not just addressing your physical body. You can go find that. You can go find that, at your local gym, your local fitness studio. You can go find it on YouTube. There's plenty of stuff out there that's just physical. And some of us, that's all we need. That's all we want. That's okay. Others of us, we long for more, especially now with the challenges that are going on in the world. It's waking us up that we are realizing we need more than just this physical, materialistic stuff. Well, what we're longing for, what we're desiring are those other 6 dimensions. So for me, power yoga, when I teach it, is really the perfect combination of athleticism with soulfulness. So try a power yoga class if you haven't already. Go check out the founders. They're around. Go check out Bryan. He's got an online site, Power Yoga on Demand. Baptiste teaches. Beryl Birch has lots of resources. Take some classes with the founders. You can check me out. I have tons of free classes on YouTube and also on my online streaming site, Inner Dimension TV. All right, thank you guys. I hope that this was helpful. I hope that it was educational. I hope that it shed some light so that now when you practice power yoga, you'll kind of appreciate the backstory of how this has all come to be. So thank you for tuning in. Let's finish now with the ultimate prayer. May we bring strength where there is weakness. May we bring courage where there is fear. May we bring compassion where there is suffering. And may we bring light where there is darkness. May we be ultimate. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure that you click subscribe and also click the link to get those 3 amazing classes: Power Yoga, Yin Yoga, and Meditation. See you next time.